Hey everybody, we're doing a really quick little short video on Marxism. Obviously, Karl Marx is named. Marx was named after Karl Marx, the dude right up here. Him a very very fine beard. He's a Prussian-born man who received a doctorate, became a journalist, wrote for a number of papers, both in Prussia as well as in the United States. He had stuff published in the United States papers as well, but these papers were considered very, very radical, okay? And as part of the Carlsbad decrees and some of the conservative crackdowns happening in Prussia, these radical papers were shut down, and Karl Marx was exiled. First, he was exiled from Prussia, and he goes to Paris. Well, believe it or not, he had exile from Paris too, which, by the way, is pretty hard to do. Eventually rolls up in London in 1845 and meets Frederick Engels, a guy down here. He goes from from London, he goes to Brussels, a couple other places where he can feel he can actually do his thing. And they write this book called pamphlet called the Communist Manifesto, and looking at their ideas, what's happening in the world. Now, a lot of Marx's inspiration comes from George Friedrich Hegel. We talked about him the other day a little bit, kind of one of our inspirees for the Revolution 1848, but became a little different for us, right? We looked at Hegel in context of the Revolution 1848 because we had this whole thesis, antithesis to create the conflict and then flip over history. Well, Engels and Marx consider themselves to be scientific, right? They looked and actually studied and analyzed the class system in Europe at this time, both in London and in Brussels and other parts of Europe. And kind of looked at socialist ideas and said, hey, can we put these two things together? This idea of a giant kind of overthrow revolution, as well as the class system. Hegel, we talked about Hegel in terms of a government. Well, can we also do this in terms of social class? And that's kind of where these guys came into it. And once again, Marx and Engels come themselves to be scientific, as they're kind of our first ever sociologists studying the classes of people that are out there and how people are living together and the impacts that people's lives have because of their social situation. So then creates the idea of communism. We have our basic tenets of communism here. We have our two groups. You got to know these terms, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we have the proletariat, our working class, and the bourgeoisie, our middle class owners who control capital. And the idea here is that our bourgeois control all the means of production. They have the mind, the entrepreneurship, all that kind of stuff, which capitalism tells us is how you get ahead. But they control all the means of production. They control the factories. And so that way they also control then the proletariat. And the fact that the proletariat has, no way to get ahead. So the idea here we're going with is that, each worker should instead be work according to their abilities and compensated according to their needs. Kind of bring ideas in from Louis Blanc from Paris. And so we're really kind of seeing this big change here of saying of trying to take this class society and make it classless. We want to try and have, according to Marx, we want to try and have a world where there's no rich and no poor. We're all kind of equal. He does say that this can only happen in an industrialized country where the classes are very, very defined. And that's what we'll get into Russia later on when we have the Russian Revolution, one more famous part of this. But, this is very, very different than our, say, capitalism factory setting of Europe that has that very, very strict class setting where we have our entrepreneurs, our middle class bourgeois who own the factories, and then our proletariat, our working class. And so he basically says we got to have a revolution, that you have the proletariat who are taken advantage of by the bourgeoisie. They have no way to prosper. And we kind of see what in AP Euro we've kind of lovingly called the wedding cake of misery here, right? This is a cartoon that was written in the late 1800s. We have our workers on the bottom here. We work for you. Here you have your bourgeois. Here we eat for you. With our military, we shoot you. Our religion, we fool you. We rule you. And capitalism, very top here. The idea that, the workers are the most important part of this whole thing. They're the ones that are holding all this stuff up. And they're the really most important. And according to Marx and Engels, the only way to fix this was public ownership. That everybody should kind of share everything. That's where communism comes from, like a communal type life, world. And that's one way to fix this whole thing. And we have to have a revolution. he was really kind of thought was going to be kind of a stage system. Okay, he thought that eventually capitalism, which we were seeing in the 19th century, would give way to socialism, a more government-controlled kind of situation where the government controls the means of production, and that would then eventually give way to communism, kind of like a stepping stone kind of situation almost. And he kind of thought maybe like with some of the stuff Louis Blanc was doing in France and that kind of stuff, those ideas happening there, and some of the reforms in England that maybe, we were on our way. Essentially, Marx said there will eventually, now I'm have those words, capitalized there, eventually be a revolution or a conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat, and that the workers of the world will unite. Now become one of the big words, the big phrases that are used as we see communist socialist revolutions happen around the world. And the revolution of 1848 was kind of like, ooh, maybe this can actually happen, right? Because we have all of Europe revolt at one time, though they weren't united, blah, 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 blah. In class, there's our interview guys in class. We'll talk more about documents and those kind of things and get more into this on Monday. So thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Make sure your reading's done. See you guys later.